Hi guys, welcome to the Lunge and Lift podcast. Today we're going to answer the question on everyone's lips: why am I so weak? Um, Only joking. It's about identifying your limiters and busting through plateaus. I think in everyone's training journey, there's a point where it doesn't feel like you're making any progress, and you're maybe not sure why. So we're going to go through a few of the principles that play into this and give you some practical advice on how to identify what's actually your limiter, run some tests, and bust through those plateaus. But before we get into it, as always, a big thank you to our show sponsor, Wit Fitness. Please check out the store in One New Change St Paul's or the website at wit-fitness.com and use our discount code LL15 to get 15% off your purchase.
Some new weightlifting shoes coming out very soon. The new Wit and Reebok shoes, very, very nice. So 15% off, hopefully. Guys.
Yeah.
Bargain, mate.
Yeah. Get 2 pairs.
So, why are you so weak, Ash?
Where do I start? Blame my parents. I blame. I think the reason I wanted to talk about this one today is that it's a common thought process that I think a lot of people run into frustration with their training for why they might not be making progress. And it came up a few times with a couple of clients recently when they actually made a new wave of progress because we put in a specific intervention. And I think hopefully it'll be very useful to listeners to sort of talk through it and understand how it all works, and some practical advice on how to best apply those principles to your own training. There's a classic saying, chain is only as strong as its weakest link, and that's very much the same in athletic pursuits, in that generally there will be one thing, and it could be a lot of different types of thing, but that one thing will be your limiter, and that's what's holding you back from performing at a higher level. And the only way you get better is by improving that limiter. And that can be on purpose, or it can be by accident. And quite a lot of, especially beginners, like the classic newbie gains are, you can just do anything. And because everything is so lacking, that you're going to make improvements across the board and accidentally work on your limiter, and your performance will improve until it doesn't. And then that's the point at which we need to apply a little bit more thought to really target what's holding you back. And we'll dig into exactly what sorts of thing that could be. But as always, the clearer you are about what your desired outcome is, the more clearly and deliberately you can target it and get the most value out of your training time and your recovery budget, as we like to say.
Yeah, I think that really kind of makes me think, especially with the newbie gain side of things, where people used to say, like, you deadlift and everything will get stronger. And it's like, in some respect it does, as you said, until it doesn't, because it's like you're creating a strong chain. As we said, as you just mentioned there, about the chain is only as strong as the weakest link. So with a deadlift in particular, how it's so total body, and it's just, building a very strong structure and foundation, that then going into your squat, you just feel like you can brace better, and so you're going to be able to lift more there, and then you're going to bench press, say, and using the power lifts, and you're going to be able to, I'd say, brace better, use your upper back better. So all these sort of links, they really do add together, and you're just like, fuck, all I need to do is deadlift. That's it. I'm getting stronger. But then you're like, okay, I'm now stuck at this weight, and I think that is one of the worst feelings, especially as a powerlifter or any strength athlete, weightlifter, that if you're using a weight on a bar as your limit, as your indicator of progress, then that can be a real depressing thing sometimes, when it's like 1 kilos and stuff like that, and you're like, I've just spent 8 weeks, and I've 8 to 12 weeks, and I've just increased by 1 kilo. Whereas, especially in the elite world, 1 kilo is huge potentially, but also people like elite trainees, they lift and they use the same weight, and it just gets easier over time. So it's not necessarily that it's they've got stronger per se, they're lifting more weight, but maybe say 150 kilos now just performs much better. The technique is better, they catch it better, they press it better, whatever it is. It's like it's got better over time. And the limiter obviously it sometimes is the athlete themselves, but we'll dig a little bit deeper into that in a bit. But what could be a simple I think thought process for identifying a limiter? What would be your first thing, your first go-to for someone to identify?
So I think most people who run into these situations have hit a bit of a roadblock. So they've been doing the same thing and progress has been going up consistently, and then suddenly they're just struggling to add weight to the bar. Like you said there, if you're using the big compound lifts, and one of the reasons why the compound lifts are great is that they do work so much of the body in one go that everything does level up. So by doing squat, bench, deadlift, a lot of other types of strength will incidentally benefit as well, until they don't, and something more specific needs to be done to target that aspect of strength. So there are so many components in any given movement or skill or exercise, and the more you can appreciate or look for, the more options you have for addressing a limitation. So at the very simplest, if you just look at like volume and intensity, like how many reps are you doing a week and how hard are they? This could be strength or cardio based. Then having a look at that is step number one. And most people know that, and they are just trying to do a little bit more every time. But the body then says, no, actually, this is not working anymore. So then we need to look at some other aspects of the movement. So it could be imbalances, like is one leg a lot stronger than the other? So say you're right leg dominant and your right leg does all of the deadlift, then actually the right leg now is struggling to put on any more strength because it's so overloaded. You might have an injury or a niggle, and the low hanging fruit might just be to get that left leg contributing a little bit more. It might be only doing 30% of the work. If you get it doing 35%, it's a lot easier to address that limitation than just continue to hammer two-legged squats or deadlifts. And that then brings up the limiter. So the overall squat performance or deadlift performance goes up because that left leg imbalance has been addressed.
I guess that's where your lunges come in, right?
Exactly. Yeah, that's exactly what they're for. Like, so looking at someone's biomechanics and saying, what is going on here? It could also be technique. So if you're looking at someone's squat, a really common area for improvement is the bar path. We talked about it a lot in previous episodes, but if as they're squatting, the bar drifts forwards towards the toes or even beyond the toes, the leverage is so much less favorable than if it stays over the middle of the foot, that if you just pull that bar back into a better vertical bar path, the same weight will feel much easier and it will feel much lighter. So a technique change there can unlock the next wave of performance. But we'll dig into a few examples later on. I think the principle here is what element of the exercise movement skill are you able to identify as holding you back, then implementing a specific intervention to address it, retesting to make sure that you can see it's definitely having an improvement. So let's go back to that right leg dominant individual for squatting. If we add in some left leg accessory work, could be left leg step ups, left leg lunges, left leg single leg squatting, and nothing else in the program changes except that. But then when you do your big back squat sets, the strength starts to improve again. We know that that was your limiter, and we can be sure that that is the way to go forward. Equally, if your back squat still stays as it is, then that's not your limiter. It's not the left-right imbalance. Then we need to look somewhere else to try and improve it.
It's funny as you're saying this. It's like you was watching me squat yesterday, and even though you wasn't, but it's so.
Am I on you?
Yeah. So yesterday I did some front squats, and as I was doing them, I did the first rep and I was like, fuck, that was all my right leg. I could just feel everything shifting to my right leg and push out. And I was like, right, okay, this second rep, focus on just pushing through the left leg at the bottom. And then it just felt so much more balanced throughout the whole thing. I then went into a superset after that of some step downs and something else. And my left side, so stable. And I was able, but just felt weak. My right side just felt strong but unstable, which is my general problem anyway, which we've discussed in previous episodes and stuff like that. But it just showed that obviously my limiter there is it was and it is my left leg, and it's just like because it might have the stability but it doesn't have that strength. So it's just funny because as you're talking about these things, it's just I'm just like, mate, this is just me to a T. But and I know it's this is such a common thing because this is also, you know, where if you're squatting and you see a lot of hip shifting, and so like, you know, your body's trying to find its strongest and easiest path out the hole, and using the squat as the example, it's just that's what it's going to do. Or even with the deadlift, you see the shift as well because your body's shifting to one side to do the work. And this is kind of then also this slight little detour here, but this is why I kind of have a bit of an issue with, say, mixed grip for not trained, say, people that are trying to improve, because you're already twisting your body one way, and then if you've got an imbalance that's quite glaring, that you're going to shift, you're just going to create this twisted structure that doesn't want to move effectively necessarily. That's just my thoughts, and it's just where I've done mixed grip over the years. And now I've gone into more of a hook grip thing. I feel so much more composed, and I like there's a lot anyway. But that was just a little side thing there, because it's just based on the limiters as we're talking about. So kind of bringing it back, Ash.
Well, no, I think that's actually mixed grip is a good point for if your grip is a limiter in deadlift and you use a normal grip, not hook grip, then you start doing hook grip or you start doing mixed grip, your deadlift could go up because it was as simple as your grip was the limiter. So I think that's actually a nice example for illustrating that if your training stimulus is to get a heavier deadlift and you're held back by your grip, then it's a really simple test that can you lift more with a hook or mixed grip? Yes, you can. So you would probably benefit by strengthening your grip. And
but then you need to train that though, because as an example, is me yesterday with some deadlifts. So I've been doing hook grip deadlifts now for however long. So obviously I had a break from lifting, but for say the past 2 years, I've basically just been doing hook grip deadlifts. And before that, it was always mixed grip. Yesterday I did a set of hook grip, felt great. Did a set of mixed grip, just out of curiosity. I couldn't even remember which way I normally hook mixed grip. So I grabbed it one way, I was like, okay, this feels a bit weird. Grab the other way, it's like, this is probably the way, but still doesn't feel right. So even though that grip is a strong grip, it just didn't feel right. So the limiter is actually then a skill-based thing, as in I need to improve the skill of holding the bar in the mixed grip or having my thumbs comfortable being crushed under load, which they are. So yeah. It's an interesting. It's not always clear, because it's sometimes, as you say, like grip strength is in like, okay, you know, if you're getting with a deadlift and you get into the top of your lift and you're losing it out of your hand, then it's a clear limiter. But sometimes a slight little change in, say, going from mixed grip to hook grip, if you have the thumbs able to, that actually you find the hook grip is actually, hook grip is easier because you can create better tension. So but that's, again, it's an individual limiter. So
yeah, but I think you're making a really good point there, in that having a scientific approach to be sure of what your limiter is really important, so you can be objective and prove yourself right or wrong. And one of the examples I wanted to bring up today was this. Yeah, it doesn't just apply to strength. We've had Luke Hall on previously to talk through our VO2 max testing, and I think that's a perfect example of how can you identify your limiter with a high degree of certainty. So it's definitely worth listening to that episode or watching it actually on YouTube, because he has all the graphs and everything. But he uses a VO2 master, which is basically like a face mask that measures your breathing rate, how much volume of the volume of oxygen you're able to bring in, and combines it with a Moxie monitor, which is basically something that goes on your leg that measures the amount of blood flowing to your leg muscles and also the saturation of oxygen, so how much is there, and you track it over time with the exercise to see how it changes. And as you approach your maximum output, you can see what the body's doing and you can see what aspect of your physiology is actually holding you back from going any further. And I did a retest on it recently with a slightly different protocol to before, but summarize my findings. Basically, I supplied loads of oxygen and loads of blood to my muscles, but as I neared failure, I actually couldn't extract much. So I think I went from about 80 down to about 50% of oxygen saturation, which means there's still 50% of the oxygen in my blood that I wasn't using before I failed. And that shows that it's a utilization limiter. So I could do loads of aerobic work to improve my ability to pull in oxygen and oxygenate my blood, but that actually wouldn't be addressing the root of the problem, which is my muscles' capacity to extract the available oxygen from the blood. Like somebody who is more adept at that might be able to deplete the oxygen in their blood down to like 20%. So now I can have a quite targeted intervention to work on that, mostly using like horrible intervals at near max effort to deplete the oxygen as well as I can and train that skill. And then we'll retest in a few weeks' time to see if my VO2 max has gone up without me doing any aerobic work to look at other aspects of my cardio.
Yeah.
And I think having that level of data is pretty recent to have it sort of widely available, but it's a perfect illustration of the scientific approach of we're going to test you to see what aspect of this skill or sport is holding you back, and then we can apply a targeted intervention. And I'm having beta alanine as well from a nutrition perspective to see if our hypothesis is correct in that that's what's holding you back. Whereas if I didn't have this data and I wasn't able to run this experiment, I could have gone out and done tons of zone 2 work to work on how much oxygen I can bring in, which would have maybe had a small benefit. But because I've got such a big limiter in the utilization side of things, it would have been very subtle in terms of how it would improve my overall performance. Whereas that utilization thing is quite low hanging fruit and hopefully bang for buck gets me a much bigger improvement.
Yeah, I think just a couple of things on that is what's really interesting is you didn't, when you was just discussing that, you didn't compare it to your last one. And I think the reason why I find that a key thing to maybe say to the audience is because it's not comparing apples with apples, because it was a different test that you did. And so again, you're going to have a slightly different response. It's a similar, so it's still a VO2 test, but the fact that, can you say to the listeners the two different tests that you did, or to the one you did the first time compared to the second one?
Yeah, so the first one was a ramp test where it was continuous, and every 2 minutes, I think, the intensity went up. Whereas the other one was a kind of ramp, but it had rest in. So they call it the 3-1-3 protocol, where you do 3 minutes at a given intensity, 1 minute rest, repeat, and then the intensity goes up. So funnily enough, my limiter was the same in both. So
That's interesting.
the aspect of my physiology that's holding me back, it's kind of reassuring that it's still the same thing, because I hadn't really done much training between the two. And
So what's interesting, I think, is then looking for your retest is obviously now you've got some specific training protocols to train towards. As you said, you're not going to go out and do a bunch of zone 2 work. You're actually going to do some specific intervals to build up that utilization. So, but what's interesting is you said you've also added in beta alanine. So now you've got two potential performance enhancements. So which one is it going to be? So was it the beta alanine that's helped you maybe utilize? So would you not keep the beta alanine out of this one and do 2 more retests and watch the difference that would
Yeah.
be the
That'd be, yeah, more scientifically rigorous for
yeah. But
sure.
obviously, fuck being scientific. You just want to just get better, right? Just give it
Yeah.
all. Throw
Yeah.
everything at it.
Yeah. Yeah. So, yeah, it's a very good challenge. And I think you're spot on in that one of the key principles of having a bit of scientific rigor around identifying your limiter is that you should only really change one variable at a time so that you can be sure that that is the thing making the difference. And that's a small example of a quite common failing in approach in that people just have these wholesale changes. They'll change everything all at once, and then you have no idea what's actually made the difference. So you might start a new squat cycle, a new sleep protocol, and a new
You started on
nutrition
Monday,
plan.
didn't you? So you have to start everything fresh. Start this brand new
Exactly.
lifestyle on Monday.
Yeah, yeah. So, and you have no idea what's actually making the change, and yeah, you might add in 5 different accessory exercises, and same goes for that. That you have no idea which one is actually making the difference. And somebody might say, "Oh yeah, when I added in this fucking banded bullshit exercise alongside split squats and step ups, that's what really transformed my squat progress." Like, I think it's probably the split squats and the step ups maybe that had a bit more of a difference. But yeah, I want that to be a key takeaway, that 1 or 2 variables at a time max, to be sure that they're
Is that
having
two
the
just to
maximum.
cover you for the Bay Allen, right? Yeah. Okay.
Exactly right. Exactly right.
So I think this is probably one of the most important things that we're going to discuss today, and the reason why is because as we want everything so instantaneously. So we're not willing to wait 6 to 8 weeks to watch what happens with something. Even say 4, you could say maybe knock it down to, but the reality is 6 to 8 weeks to see if an exercise or 2 exercises are going to benefit your, say, squat, right? Most squat cycles anywhere from 6 to 12 weeks. So if you are doing a, say, squat cycle as an example, that stick with one accessory, maybe 2, that you say you think, cool, this is my current, this is what I'm predicting. So using me as the example, where say my left leg is weaker than my right, I know this just across the board. So me doing, make sure I do say I pick some step ups and I do some lunges. That they're my 2, say, single leg exercises that I'm going to really focus on building up my strength. So then when I come to the end of my squat cycle, I can see, rather than doing single leg step ups, doing lunges, doing reverse lunges, doing all these different single leg exercises, because I know I have one weaker leg. And it's like, but what single leg exercise? Because again, I think what you mentioned at the start is that about your recovery. So yes, doing all these single leg exercises will probably be great for your squat progress. But at the same time, when you come to retest, are you recovered enough from all the extra volume of accessories that you've been doing over the time? And so it's weighing it up, as in what's the least I can do to get the most bang for my buck. And I think we're all guilty of it, of wanting to do as much as possible to give us the best chance of progress, which, you know, we're trying to do the right thing. But in the long term, we're probably doing more damage, because again, we're not going to be able to recover from the do everything starting on Monday type mentality.
Exactly. Yeah. Exactly. And if you can't measure the change, you can't be sure that it's making the difference. And I think that, more than anything else for me, is the key thing, that completely chucking the baby out with the bathwater. So you've got an awesome program that's working really well in a lot of ways, but this one movement isn't going up. And then you think, right, I'm just going to change everything, start afresh. There's so much change. One, it's way more likely to result in niggles or injuries because it's a system shock on your body, but you're also chucking away something which was giving you loads of benefit in loads of other ways, but just maybe that one thing was holding you back. I think CrossFit training is a unique challenge in this regard, because there are so many things to be getting better at,
Yeah.
that identifying your limiter and progressing it while potentially at the expense of other aspects of the sport of CrossFit is very, very difficult. And it's a bit of a piece of string question as to how much of an intervention should you put in to work on your weakness. Because if you're a very balanced athlete, then you should just stay balanced and level everything up in parallel. But like we talked about in the CrossFit episode, the games episode, if you've got one glaring limiter in your overall CrossFit performance, then actually you probably need to go in on it pretty hard so that it does catch up the rest of your game, and then your overall performance is better, even if across the board things go down a little bit, but your limiter goes way up, then your overall scores will improve. So
yeah, I think that's when it comes to, we're talking about like with changing everything up. And one of the, I think if you've got one thing that's just not coming up as quickly as it should do, so then, as you say, maybe you still keep the same program, but you can drop the volume or intensity down on some of the things that have been progressing really well, because you want to, say, using squat, bench, dead as the example, right? And your bench press and your deadlift's going up, but your squat just isn't coming up. Maybe dropping the volume or intensity down in the bench press and deadlift just to maintain where you're currently at, and then maybe adding in some extra squat volume or some adding some extra intensity there to then help with that to bring that up. So rather than change it up completely, you're still keeping the same, you're just reducing slightly and then being a bit more specific with your intent. And this, I think, is so important when we're trying to identify limiters, because it's not always, say, like, for instance, using the squat as the example, as we've discussed already. So say like right leg, left leg, and all these sort of things, like, or going to the deadlift. Like, you need to be able to have a good understanding of your body to be able to gain an understanding of what your limiter is, because it's all well and good filming yourself, but unless you've got a good coach's eye, even if you're not a coach, but you have a good understanding of a movement, unless you understand what you're looking at, you have to go by feel. And for instance, with a deadlift, if you find every time you deadlift that it's just your lower back is going to be the thing that absolutely blows up, then you have to understand that, cool, okay, what can I do to fix that? And I think that's a really important thing, because you might have a really good looking deadlift that you film it looks great, but you always finish your session just hunched over with a lower back pain from hell. That's not normal. And I think that's it. That's on you as an athlete to understand and think, right, what can I do now to maybe work on this? What do you think to that?
Yeah, I think there's a couple of different scenarios that could be playing out here, in that either your lower back is just weak, so you could strengthen your lower back relative to the rest of your body, which would mean that it's less of a limiter, because that could be the part of your physiology that is not as strong as everything else. Or
you're not supposed to work your lower back with a deadlift, no? It's not a lower back exercise.
Yeah, you can. Or it could be that the lower back is doing too much and that other muscle groups are not chipping in as much as they should or could be. So this is a perfect situation to employ our experiment. So step one, you could just do extra lower back strengthening work and see if that improves the situation, so you don't have really bad lower back pain after you deadlift. Or experiment two would be to work on your technique, try and get more glute or hamstring recruitment during the movement, and see if that makes more improvement to the deadlift performance. If you did both in parallel, you wouldn't know which one it was. That's like, they could both help, and doing them both together could see a deadlift improve, and probably would. But from a scientific point of view, you're not then sure which one was actually the limiter. So you're kind of tied in and obliged to continue both of them to keep your deadlift going up. Whereas if you were like, let's just do the movement mechanics and get the glutes and hamstrings going better, then you see an improvement, you know for sure that was a limiter.
Yeah, and do you know what's really interesting about this is, because where I discussed there about like being able to feel the movement and stuff like that, I find the lower back, so especially with the deadlift, right, is a really interesting like place of the body to try and get a good understanding of, because most muscles, if you pre-fatigue them, right, it means they don't overwork because they're not the dominant muscle being utilized, right? So if you did say a bunch of leg extensions with before you did some squats, you'll probably get a lot more glute and hamstring activation because the quads have been pre-fatigued, so they're already tired, so they're not going to be able to give their full force and take over the movement, as an example, right? But with the lower back, when you start to utilize it a lot, and say if you pre-fatigue it, you get such a pump that then it becomes uncomfortable. So then going into a deadlift with, say, pre-fatigued, already, say, stimulated your back, that then will give a false positive in a way. So you'll be thinking, or say false negative, because you'll be thinking, hang on a minute, my back really hurts, because it's just, even though there's nothing wrong with a lower back pump, we're so afraid because we're told, oh, lower back pain is really bad and stuff like that. It's like, but understanding the difference between a pump and pain can be really quite challenging, because anyone that's done, say, a bunch of touch and go deadlifts, or like, say, 21-15, like Diane, 21-15-9 of handstand push-ups and deadlifts, you know the lower back pump that you get, you haven't caused any pain, but the pump is so uncomfortable that it's then really hard to distinguish anything else. So I find when it does come to, say, strengthening obviously we're talking about here with the limiter, it's like when you are, say, trying to strengthen your lower back, it can be quite challenging to identify if you are or not. Do you see where I'm kind of going with this slightly?
Yeah, I think I know what you mean.
It's just, for me, I'm just saying the one particular thing is with the lower back. So this is just like across the board, just lower back training is quite challenging, because I think people have a misconception of it's not good to feel a pump in your lower back, and it gives you discomfort. And a pump in an arm feels great, but pumping your lower back to be like, whoa, that feels weird. And I think it's understanding that.
Yeah, I think, I get you now. Like the difference between training your lower back in a good way versus your lower back getting overloaded is hard to distinguish. I think that's probably...
Yeah, sorry, it was a bit long-winded.
That might be... That's my interpretation anyway.
Yeah.
Okay, let's talk about weightlifting, mate, because I think this is a perfect way to illustrate some of these concepts. And one of my good mates, Jamie Lau, who's been on the show before, used to always say that training someone to snatch better is so easy because you can work on almost anything and the snatch will benefit. And I think that's it's a good way to think about things, because it is such a multifaceted movement. There are so many aspects of performance involved in a snatch that working on any of them will have some benefit to the snatch. But on the flip side, if there's one glaring gap in your snatch, then you could work on everything else. But if that thing is the thing that's limiting you putting more kilos on the bar and you don't address it, you will hit a roadblock and the snatch won't go up. So, for example, if your overhead squat is the same as your snatch, it's very unlikely that you're going to be able to add more weight to your snatch until your overhead squat strength goes up. But equally, we could tease out any individual component of like wrist stability, your shoulder position, your hip mobility, ankle mechanics, first, second, third pull, like all of these elements in the snatch. If one of them is massively off, then it's going to be very difficult to level up. So the more of these things that we're aware of, and the more of them that we are able to test or identify as being a limiter, the more tools we can apply to specifically address what the limiters are.
So how could the listeners maybe try and get it? Because you said that as a really good point of like, once you've got an understanding of, say, where that limiter is, but especially something with like the snatch, how would someone that might not be, say, a coach be able to maybe find out what their limiter is?
Yep, I think it's a great question. First thing is chunking up the skill. So if we look at the components of a snatch, there are an almost infinite number of things that we could dig into, but focusing on the main fundamental components. So the pull, the overhead squat, and maybe the bar path as the key criteria. If we're looking at those three elements, the simplest thing would be to compare your videos to someone at the Olympics and see where the major points of difference are. So if their bar path is almost perfectly vertical and yours is looping out in front, that's a big point of difference and potentially the limiter. Comparing your numbers between how much you can snatch pull versus how much you can overhead squat versus how much you can actually snatch, that's also going to provide some clues as to whether there's something that's a real limiter. Like if your overhead squat is way heavier than your snatch, then you know it's probably something snatch technique related that's not letting you tap into that overhead squat strength. But equally, if they're really close, then potentially the overhead squat strength is going to be something that's holding back your overall snatch numbers.
Nice. So I think this is, when you talk about being really close, is an example. When I was back in my strongest a little while ago, I had really close numbers. And so my power clean was, say, it was at 145. My squat clean was at 151 at the time. It then went up to the 160, and my front squat was then 170. So I had such a close issue here. So obviously, I'm not going to be able to squat clean more than I can front squat because it's the same movement essentially, but a lot more dynamic and a lot faster. Now, my question to you would be: was I too powerful for my strength? So because of how high my power clean was compared to, say, my squat clean, or was I just not skilled enough compared to my strength?
Definitely never too powerful, mate.
No.
That's cool. It's an interesting way of framing it. I think without seeing videos, it's difficult to identify whether there's any major gaps in your technique. Having a power clean that's so close to your squat clean, you really need the qualitative information as to what do they look like.
Yeah.
Are you pulling the bar super high in that squat clean, or is it when it was 150 and 170, that's not really alarm bells for closeness. But is it knowing your back squat's a lot heavier than your front squat is a big clue as well, that your leg strength when you are knee dominant could be holding you back. So having a pull that's very close to your front squat, I'm trying to you know what I'm trying to say here, is a indicator that just improving your raw strength might be beneficial to improving your clean. Because if your power clean, when you pull it high and when you pull it low, is pretty much the same, then I'm making an absolute mess of this.
Right, yeah, so it's all good. It's all good. So basically, we discussed this slightly before we come on, because I found this really interesting, because as a power lifter / then going into some weightlifting, I'm a low bar squatter, so it's a lot more posterior chain, a lot more glutes, hamstrings, obviously still quads and stuff, but it's a lot more, say, posterior loaded compared to a high bar back squat. Now, high bar back squat, when you look at most weightlifters, they will have the bar across their trap, so it'll be in a lot more upright position, and they'll also do front squats. So those two movements are going to essentially are perfect accessories for cleans and snatches, because they're a lot more upright. Now, with a low bar back squat, you wouldn't want to be, say, strengthening, say, so much of your posterior chain, because that bottom position, if you caught a snatch in that over, like torso over bottom position, your shoulders will be taking way too much of that load. Now, what I found fascinating is the fact that I had a 160 kilo clean and only 170 kilo front squat, but then a 220 kilo back squat at the time. So there's such a difference between my front squat and back squat that it showed that my limiter is actually probably more my quad strength. So I should probably, and then so throwing in a cycle of maybe front squats to get stronger in that position will one in turn obviously help my back squat anyway, because building quad strength is not going to hinder me. But then also that's going to help my performance otherwise. Now, when it comes to the power side of stuff, having at the time then when it got, so I had the 145 and the 150 one clean. So 145 power clean and a 151 squat clean. Having them so close just showed that I didn't have the skill to catch it dynamically and stabilize it in my upper back and throughout my thoracic, because with a front squat, I can take my time, I can rack it, lock myself in, step back and execute the lift. Whereas when you're catching a clean, you have to do that at such a fast pace that you have to be able to stabilize, and that's why you meet the bar, don't let it crash onto you. So when it comes to the limiter side of stuff, understanding that if I wanted to improve my squat clean, I actually then need to find an exercise that would be a suitable exercise. So clearly my strength isn't the issue, seeing my power clean and squat clean are so close together necessarily. Yes, I need to build up my leg strength to say squat more, but it's in actually my ability to catch the bar and then stabilize it. So then an accessory might be to maybe just do a squat clean with a pause in the catch, because then I'm getting comfortable in the bottom of the hole. I'm also going to be building leg strength. And I'm also going to then feel confident in that bottom position, because I can then just gradually increase my load over time and get stronger. So that only comes from understanding my lifts overall, and also then, as you mentioned, looking at my back squat and seeing the difference between there and the front squat. So I think they all tie together, which is why it's so important to, track your progress, write down your numbers, understand how you perform across the board. Because it's not always as clear cut. Because if I say, oh, look at my power clean, it's a really good power clean. Oh, you must just be a powerful athlete. But you're like, well, not really, because then you're a bit shit there. So it just shows that you need to understand the full picture rather than, what's the thing about the forest for the trees? So when you're so far in the weeds and like you're in there and like you're just like, shit. So that's why it's important to take a step back sometimes.
There you go. Thank you. I had my second vaccine yesterday, so it's my excuse for losing my train of thought. But no, I think you've dug us out of that one very nicely. I think the point I was trying to make there was when you have a bigger gap between your squat clean and your front squat, then you'd be looking at what's going on in your clean. That means you can't access that leg strength. But when you then got your clean much closer to your front squat, it shows that you've actually got pretty efficient clean technique, because you're able to access most of the strength that you've got in the front squat. So then the limiter could be just pure quad strength, because we know your back squat is a lot heavier. So your posterior chain is nice and strong, but when you're in that front squat position, you're not shifting nearly as many kilos. So to get your clean up, your clean technique now isn't really the limiter, because you're lifting 160 out of 170 possible kilos in the front squat. So actually getting that front squat up and applying your efficient clean technique to a higher strength potential means your clean will hopefully get even heavier. But previously, when say you had a 150 clean and a 170 front squat, then there's still more room to bring up that clean purely through clean skill, which I don't think you made huge strength developments in that period of time, but you added 10 kilos to your clean because your clean technique improved. And that's what I was trying to say when I was mumbling all over the place earlier.
I think a lot of this comes down to what we've been kind of discussing this whole episode, which is having a form of test. So you having your skill of whatever it is, whether it's, as you said, like with you, improving your VO2, with me at the moment, trying to build up my strength and stuff. So that's our test. Looking for our limiter to saying, right, okay, so at the moment you said is your utilization of oxygen. So that's where your limiter is. So you've now got a specific protocol to improve that. With me, I think because I'm coming back out of COVID and also triathlon. So having two things which I'm kind of Now bringing strength training back in, I'm back to newbie gains land. So I'm bringing myself back. But what I've got to be very careful now is to make sure I don't do too much. Because I think that's now where I get carried away, because I've had so much exposure over the time. I know what my old limiters were. I'm going to do all the single legs and stuff like that, which we mentioned earlier. It's very easy to do. But what I need to make sure is, and as you've got a retest booked. I'm going to have a retest as when I build up through my couple of strength cycles, look at what's gone on. So, filming my lifts, you obviously having some clear data to work off, and being able to then say, all right, this is now my retest, and I can see what now do I need to do to keep progressing forward. But it's making sure you have point A, point B, and then understand there's a point C, D, E, F, and then AA, BB, CC. So you go through, because it's a big, long journey.
That's it. I think, maybe we should wrap it up there with some takeaways. I think key things that I want the listeners to come away with are: there's always something that's holding you back from further progress. It could be simple, it could be more complex and multifaceted, but the more dimensions by which you can evaluate your performance, the more focused and effective your training can actually be. So if you're aware of lots of different things, you can actually be more dialed in and focused on what's holding you back, rather than just carpet bombing your training plan and hoping that you happen to target
you don't want to fluke it, basically.
limiter. Exactly, yeah. And always track your results, so you know that it's not working. And if it's not working, then that's your signal that something needs to change. And as long as you've got a little hypothesis and test it out as scientifically as you can, then you're making a step in the right direction. And you can always course correct after you've given the experiment enough time.
Beautiful. And also, it might just be that you need a bit more faith in yourself when it comes to lifting, because I've had it with clients where they don't know what weight I've put on. I've had it with myself. I don't know what weight's on the bar, and I go and lift it. We've mentioned before about my snatch and stuff, and it's like I essentially added 5 kilos onto my snatch within 2 weeks, not based on strength, because the skill was there. So it's just because I didn't have faith that I could hit a certain lift. Also, I was up against someone else in a little mini competition, but it was that which is not essentially doubting myself, because as I mentioned in that, when I said about this, is as soon as when I knew I hit 130, I added ones on either side, because I knew I was then at my point where I wanted to hit, and I doubted myself and did a stupid technique and missed it, because I knew deep down I wanted to hit 140. So it just shows that sometimes the limit is actually your own belief in what you do. So maybe get your training partner to trick you. Not too much. Don't put too much on the bar. Don't be stupid. But that can be a little thing.
So limiting beliefs, eh?
Yeah, exactly. So guys, we really hope you enjoyed today's episode. If you do need any help on your limiters, there's 2 coaches here which would love to help you. So drop us a message either on our Instagram at lunge.lift, or you can find us specifically. Look in the description box down below. Thank you for your time. It's been a really good one today. We hope you've got some stuff to take away. If you did enjoy it, please do share it with others. Help us grow. It makes a big difference. It really is helping us get out there. Our numbers are increasing, but obviously we would like to increase them more. And if you do want to leave us a cheeky review, we would love that on Apple Podcasts. It's definitely something we'd love. So thank you very much for your time, and we will see you next week.
Cheers, guys.